Welcome, everybody. Day after Christmas. I'm Dr. Terry Wager, and I am coming from a greenhouse. And this is my good friend, Kevin Peloso. And what are we talking about today, Kevin?
We are discussing communication.
We're communicating about communication. Awesome.
Mhm.
Uh, so, what has your experience been with communication and how easy it is in some situations and how hard it is in others?
Yeah, I think communication is an interesting one. I have this debate actually with one of my business partners frequently about it, which we're both kind of right, but they're interesting perspectives. Vinny. So when he's giving information to clients, right, his belief is it's just information, right? Whether it's good information, bad information, like I'm just giving the information, even if it's very bad, and just kind of letting things fall where they fall, which in some instance it makes sense. Um, my perspective on it is a little different, where almost the polar opposite, where it's not just information. In fact, you could say the same thing and it could mean, depending on, how you say it or how you present it, could mean 10 totally different things. It could be something as simple as saying somebody's name, and it could convey very many different meanings. So
Absolutely. And all I got to do is say, think back to when your parent, whichever one, was upset with you and said your name in that one way that you knew you need to run high. I think everybody, yeah. Oh, I remember that.
yeah.
It's a very, very good point. And the interesting thing, and I titled this today myself. Um, I heard exactly what you told me. Why did I get it so wrong? And it goes to that, but also the other piece that I think about a lot is um, Kevin can say something to me, and I've experienced this with a lot of my clients and a lot of my interactions, but and especially my mom. She was very good at interpreting, but we say something and our head changes the message into either what we want to hear, what we want to protect against, what we basically think they mean in some way, and so we change the information in our head within a millisecond, and then we respond to the information we told ourselves instead of the other person. And so, if you think about that, going back to your clients and Vinny giving information, well, he's giving it in the context of this is just information, but then he's not thinking about the idea that they have preconceived notions or
How they
assumptions,
perceive it.
biases, that actually filter that information into either fearful information or overstepped information. Or go ahead.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because it's kind of a twofold sort of thing where Vinny's like, I'm going to give you the information. We'll let it, and this is with like employees. It's not just with clients, just in general, delivering any kind of news. But he's like, I'll just give you, I'll give you the information and we'll see where it falls kind of thing. The issue that I have, which is where his approach actually can be a little more beneficial because he's not as locked into how the other person's going to receive the information. For me, many times I overlock into how the other person's going to receive the information and overthink about it. And in turn, what it does is it can pollute the message I'm trying to get across because I'm playing this chess match in my head of how many different ways can they respond to this message. Whereas maybe Vinny's approach may be a little more beneficial of like, it's information, just convey it, and wherever, however they react.
And that's definitely an approach that if you're looking at those two approaches and going, okay, muddied waters from too many avenues that it could go. Now I'm moving into taking care of the other person's emotions a little too much and trying to prepare. However, if you're looking at his side of things, as in not preparing at all, and give the information, let the chips fall where they may. Um, Both have strengths, both have weaknesses, and I think the big thing that I see with that is, if we leave it to the other person to interpret, they're going to interpret it however they're geared to take information. And so if they're more on the victim stance, or they're more on the protect themselves stance, you give information and they're going to look for where they need to protect themselves around. They're going to take it wrong. If we go to the opposite side of things, where we are going to strategize and construct this to the point that there is no stone not turned, so that we know exactly how every avenue could go, we're never going to tell them anything.
Right. It's you're stuck in analysis paralysis.
Right, of how it might go. And so I think that there's the when we step back and go, okay, so what's going on with communication anyway? Well, if we step back away from those two scenarios, and we'll come back to them, but if we really look at it, what happens is people are living in a constant assumptive role of, they know what's going on, because we all kind of want to know what's going on in environment, so we tell ourselves we do. And then the other is living in complete confirmation bias, because we all like to also be right. And so we're living in these two worlds as human beings, of trying to assume what's happening in the situation and then confirming that we're right about what's happening. And so we live this assumption confirmation experience.
The red car bias. Right?
Exactly. Now that I'm thinking red car, I see them everywhere. And it's so amazing how much those patterns show up in our day-to-day actions, that we basically miss opportunities. We miss situations where we could really be having differences show up in our lives. The other thing is we have conversations that happen over and over and over again, because we get in front of 10 different people and we use the same confirmation bias with the same assumption bias, and we just talk to ourselves, and everything was just us talking to ourselves with that person starting the topic. And it sounds kind of crazy, but we're human. And one of the things that I have found working with all of the humans I work with is that our heads all have the tendency to create these patterns where we get the same results wherever we go. And so it's interesting when that happens, because and I've talked to many people like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do that because this, that, and the other thing. And then they go to the next thing and they have the same situation and they have the same reasons why it's not going to work. And then they go to a different person, and you have somebody that is either more open or less in those two biases. And they're like, I don't have those experiences with those people at all. And I know I was very general in both of those, but the thing that I want to point out is our assumption and bias working together will create for ourselves, no matter who is in the situation, we will encourage that other person outside of the situation to act in the way that we've asked them to, with our assumption and with our bias. And so we don't go in to conversations open often. We go into our conversations ready to respond to what our ego is telling us is going to happen. And so think about being a salesperson with the assumption and confirmation, and your assumption is that people don't want your product.
Yeah, I was going to say it could kind of work for you or against you.
Absolutely. And honestly, it can. If you're the same salesman and you go in with the assumption that everybody loves this product and everybody's going to buy it, you can create the same confirmation bias and start paying attention to only people that buy it, and you'll remove all of the other people who don't, with this assumption that they do. Well, they don't know it's good. but more often than not, because we're protective in our nature, we're going to go, people don't want it. We're afraid of rejection. And so we protect against it. And that's why so many people are not good with sales instead of everybody's crushing it. Um, and, you know, we will go in. The other piece, I brought up sales. Everything is a sale in this world. My idea to your idea. Are you going to buy my idea and agree with me, or are you going to reject my idea and have a different idea? And so that's a sales conversation or transactional conversation within a relationship, and we have them all the time. And this is where relationships tend to go bad, is because our assumption and our confirmation working together, if we're not feeling good about the topic we're talking about, we will shut down the conversation before anybody else is able to actually share what they think or start to mine for more information.
Yeah. It's yeah, it's communication's an interesting dynamic. It's almost like a weird dance that you kind
That's
of have
good.
to know yourself, and you have to know your dance partner.
Yeah, yeah, and it goes back to emotion. It goes back to emotional regulation. It goes back to when there's problems. Where am I dysregulated? Where am I either feeling like a victim in my own life and my own experience that this is triggering, and where am I trying to triumph over that? And so I'm going to bring it out in the conversation. I had this friend years ago that was on the little paranoid side of things, and you'd say something to him. He goes, "I know what you're trying to do here." It's like, and he'd say it just like that. It's like, and he wasn't kidding. It wasn't like a joke or anything. He's like, "I know what you're trying to do." Like,
Yeah,
all right,
they're after you.
yeah. And it's like, not trying to do anything here, but I think that your ego's got you a little bit. And it's so funny to watch people kind of get that. What are you trying to? What are you trying to say? What are you trying to do? They're like, I just walked in the room and said hi. What am I trying
It's
to do
like,
here?
nothing.
Right. I don't think I was doing anything, but now I'm thinking about doing something. And funny enough, that answer right there is really kind of an interesting one, because if somebody starts to project that stuff from their assumption and from their confirmation bias looking for it, we tend to walk in and start playing that role that they had instead of our own role. And so if we're in an interaction with a coworker or with a subordinate, somebody that's working for us, or somebody that's working under us, or we're with a client, or we're with another prospective partner in some sort of way, and we start doing that assumption and confirmation, what we're doing is we're not even in the interaction. We're not in the relationship there. We're in our own head trying to figure out how to deal with. And I would actually kind of say that the way you are looking for every angle, when you get into looking for every angle, you actually fell into that assumption and confirmation bias on all of the possibilities that your wonder will give you. um, and so you start to actually have fun with it and try to figure out and get into this. Okay, I'm not just going to do a little bit of a dance back and forth. I'm going to do my own cha-cha, and see what I
Pretty
can work
much.
out here. What's that?
I said, yeah, pretty much.
And what happens is, and one of the reasons you're attracted to what Vinny does with just put the information and let them decide with it is, you don't have to expend so much energy. But if he was to look at, wait a minute, what are we missing from this information that I'm laying down here? Am I just laying the information as content, or am I putting a context to it? And one of the things I think a lot about is people are so busy with content that they do forget context. They do forget pre-framing. They do forget helping people to understand why the questions are being asked, or why the information is being shared, or what the specifics are of the information. And so people get lost in the information a lot of times. And I liken that to the idea of, if I told you that he went to the store and got the groceries, all you would know is that a person who you don't know who it is went to a store somewhere and got some groceries. And if I asked you more about it, you'd start putting in your own information about who he was. You'd start putting your own information about what kind of groceries they got. And you'd start putting in your own information about what store they went to. Or you'd be completely lost and say, I don't know what you just said. And how did I get it so wrong? And that's kind of where I was going with this when I was thinking about this, because we had that exact situation with one of our clients who they work in very much, and they're not aware that they were doing this, and we're solving it right now by being much more specific about information and how we convey it. But they were talking about, well, they should have the information and they should do this, and it should all be in the document. And it's like, do you know that it's in the document? Well, I think it is. And so we start to see that, oh, the information was not clear. It was not concrete. It was not specific. And then the next person that gets the information has a whole bunch of questions that they didn't know were answered. Now, the first person in this whole process, the sales guy, actually had the information, but he left it in his head and he didn't put it down. And so in that case, this person has the information, but now this person that's the second person in the process has to go and talk to the person instead of read the specific information. And while that's great, even if he did write the specific information, we also want them to touch base to make sure that the specific information written is the same stuff that's in his head, to make sure that there's no gaps in there. And like I said, this is a very new process for these people, but it was very apparent very quickly that what somebody's saying is not what the other person's hearing. And how many times does this happen in your life? How many times does it happen in my life? I know that many, many times I walk into a conversation with somebody that is just me and them, and I have no context to what I'm listening to. And so then I go, wait. Help me understand something. But and here's a question for you, Kev. Have you ever been in a situation where they started talking and you didn't know what was going on, so you pretended you did?
Oh, yeah.
It's like the first thing is like, oh, shoot, I wasn't listening to the beginning. I need to catch up. Right? And if anybody's ever been in a relationship for 10 minutes with a partner, a significant other type relationship, intimate relationship, if you don't think you got the information in the beginning and you're lost, we start to feel pressured and we start to feel attacked with the information, going, oh no, they're going to be upset with me if they realize I don't know what you're talking about. And so we start to backpedal and try to remember what they were talking about, or try to put the pieces together so we get the context that may not have been given. And as a result, we're sitting there feeling like we just screwed up really bad, and the context might not have been given. What we really need to do is we need to step back and go, wait a minute, did I get the context? If I didn't get the context, I need to put my hand up and say, I don't know if context was given, but I don't have it. And that's my fault if I didn't have it. And it's no problem if it wasn't given, but I would like it so I can track this conversation. Right? And when we can do that, and we do it smoothly, without blaming the other person or without feeling shameful that we were not listening or something like that, and let them know that we appreciate them and they're important to us, so we want to hear it, we actually correct the situation really quickly, and we can get on the same page really quickly. But people don't do that. They freak out. And then because they freak out, they start backpedaling. You're going to say something. What's up?
No, I'm just laughing. I just, yeah.
Why?
Yeah,
You're
people get
right.
all, yeah. People get wound up.
People get really wound up, and honestly, it's not because of anything we do when we mess up, unless we try to pretend we didn't mess up, then they get more wound up, or unless we blame them, then they get wound up. But people get wound up no matter who it is, because we're missing the information. And then once there's a rift, the ego starts talking to us, no matter who it is. And there's 4 people in the conversation instead of 2. And I always make the joke that wherever I am, there's 2 of me. There's the me that shows up, that's me, that is wanting the connection and wanting to be there and wanting to be a part of. And then there's the ego that wants to protect me. And that person shows up about 2 minutes before in the conversation to start scaring me anyway. And so we got to be aware of, no matter how many people are in the conversation, there's 2 for each person. And so that ego is going to come in, and the ego is going to be the great interpreter of every piece of information, right, wrong, or indifferent, good, bad, or indifferent, fun, exciting, or boring. That ego is going to go in and try to create meaning that might not be there. And so
ego creates the context.
It creates the context if context isn't given. It will also distort context if it wants to, or if it feels like we're threatened. And so the funny thing is, we can't get rid of the ego. And a lot of people love to say, let's just kill the ego. We'll just leave emotion out of it. Leave all that out. Yeah, you can't get rid of it, and you can't get rid of emotion. What you got to do is you got to have that relationship with yourself and that good sense of humor about yourself, that you're doing that to yourself. And everybody's doing it at some level. And what I mean is, some people are aware of it and some people aren't aware of it. And if you're one of the people that listen to this and say, I don't have that happening, you're missing what your ego's talking to you about. You're missing that you're having that. And, the ego's talking to you is the same thing as you thinking. And we got to be paying attention to that, because where we make the most mistakes is listening to ourselves interpret what the other person said. And as a result, we get confused. And when we get confused, then we have this problem of not knowing if they confused us or we confused us, but we're pretty sure it was them because they were there.
It can compound in the wrong direction.
Absolutely. It could turn into lawsuits.
Imagine that.
Yeah. And if you look at any kind of disagreement, it always stems back from people were not paying attention to what was being said. It doesn't matter what it is. It's always that people weren't paying attention to what was being said. And then the next step is vying for control over the situation. And one of the things that I talk about is fear drives the desire for control, and control destroys relationships. And so if we're looking for control of the conversation, we're looking to destroy the relationship. But if we start slowing down a little bit and going, okay, I'm missing context, or they're missing context, or we have 2 different contexts going on, there's something going on in this conversation that we're missing, and we start to become more curious about it and empathic. And what I mean by empathic is understanding that they're having emotions, whether they know about or they don't, but we can actually, by being curious, pull some of that out and allay the miscommunication, allay the fear, and start to create understanding in the interaction that helps us to make much more inroads towards an agreement by asking those questions. The problem is that we want to go fast. We want to go too fast, and we want to get it over with if it's an uncomfortable conversation, or we want to just stay in our assumption and our confirmation bias and blame them that they're dumb or stupid or don't understand or never going to understand or they're not worth it. And when we do that, we're basically ending the relationship in that moment that could end up ending the relationship on a longer term basis. But it all stems from, we don't want to communicate, although we want them to. And most of the time, what we want to have the communication is them agreeing with us that we're right. Perfect.
Yeah.
So what do we do? What is it that we can do to solve this thing, Kev? What do you do when you realize that you're doing the bunches and bunches of directions with the conversation. What do you do?
Ask more questions.
All right. And
I'd say
what tends
that's
to
a huge
happen with
piece of it. You get answers.
that? And then
Um,
what do the answers do? By the way, I like
the
this a
an-
lot.
the answers start illuminating a path for the direction of the conversation.
Absolutely.
It's a method. I wish I used it a little more. Vinny's actually very good at this, but like asking questions and kind of letting the other person, almost making your point of view obvious in a way, letting the other person get there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and I actually teach people how to do that, and what I call it is breadcrumbing. And so
breadcrumbing.
I lay a breadcrumb down for them to pick up and then
You do this
illuminate.
very well too.
Thank you.
Speaking of
Uh,
which, yeah, I
maybe
was just like thinking, I'm like, wait, yeah, you've done this like a ton too.
yeah,
Um,
and I do it because I have been guilty many many times of believing that I can tell somebody and get them to see my point of view by painting the picture for them. But if I paint the picture for them, it's going to come out distorted in their view. I need them to pick up the paint and the paintbrush and paint their own
right.
picture by the questions. And so when we think of it like that, it's really, instead of being the disseminator of information, we have to be the collector of information and start to have them paint the picture so that we can see what they see the way they see it. And I learned this in school, uh, learning how to actually be a therapist, learning how to actually take the information and help them to actually say what they're thinking and what they really mean versus what their protection is saying or their ego is saying and what their ego means, because there's two different messages all of the time. And I used to begin when I worked, especially when I worked with couples or I worked with groups, I'd be like, okay, we're going to create a space in here, a safe space. No, we're going to create a space, not safe necessarily, but an adventurous space, a space where we can be dangerous and we can say what's coming out of our mouth. And then we're going to all give everybody permission to fix it if it came out wrong, because we don't know what our bias is actually going to spit out. We don't know what our assumptions are going to spit out. But I can guarantee that somebody's going to go, "You're really mad at me," is one of the assumptions, or "You don't really like me the way I think you should," or "You don't respect me." And that stuff is going to come out when we start talking. And so when we move it to a sales thing, you're trying to rip me off is one of the first things everybody's thinking in sales. You're trying to get the most money for the least amount of effort because you're a salesperson. Okay, we'll say that out loud. Go ahead, and we can clean it up if we need to. Because if that's an assumption that's underlying the person in the sale, then we need to address that. If they're saying something to the effect of, "I know that you're trying to sell me snake oil." Okay, great. What kind of snake oil were you thinking of? And is that the stuff that I have, or do I have some better stuff? Um, right? And use some humor, but at this, it's really about extracting, but not invalidating why we do it. And so it is just like Kevin, you were saying, is this idea of a dance. We have to validate, appreciate, and empower the person to be sharing their information as we ask more questions to get more clarity around what they're thinking and why they're thinking it. And when we do that, all of a sudden we start to get their picture that they were painting. And then instead of going, "No, that's the wrong picture," we go, "Okay, that's your picture. How is your picture different than mine?" And then get them to see and look at our picture compared to their picture and have them examine the difference. And when we do that, what happens is they start to see their own holes. They start to see where they misinterpreted. They start to see where they made the assumptions, and we don't have to point it out. And as that happens, sometimes you get a giggle here and there. Sometimes you get a, "Oh my God, I blew it. I see I was wrong." And we start to actually change the dynamic of the relationship from an adversarial thing into a real open-minded, a deeper conversation. And when we
Cooperative.
can do that, we say that again?
Cooperative.
Cooperative, exactly. And we start working together, and now we're both looking at the pictures and we're both examining, and we can really look at it as, okay, are we on the same page? Are we aligned? Are we connected on this? Are we going to be moving forward with whatever it is? Are we adopting a uh, created understanding here now? And when we can do that, everybody starts to really appreciate each other much more. The biggest problem, I think, in communication is we start out thinking that everybody has the same context we do, and I guarantee we don't. And so, closing thoughts, Kev.
Closing thoughts. I would say overall, for anybody watching, that it's worth putting effort into thinking about how you communicate and how you can improve it. It'll make your life a whole lot better. And I feel like everybody has room to improve there. Nobody's perfect, and being aware of it's the first step.
Absolutely. I've been teaching this stuff for 30 years, and I still make mistakes. And I still walk into it, and I still got to one of my key focuses for myself is really being able to put my hand up when I make a mistake and say I was wrong. I blew it, because especially as the expert, I think that I fall into the assumption that people think that I should know exactly what I'm doing all of the time and be the expert all of the time. And I'm still human, and I still make the mistakes. And so I also have to have the humility to be able to put my hand up and say I'm wrong. And the funny thing is in doing that, I encourage other people to be able to do that. And I might find the information that I was missing to make the mistake in the first place. So all of it is really good. But for me, my closing thought is, if you're having problems with other people communicating with you, stop looking at how they're communicating and what they're doing wrong, and start asking yourself how you're wrong. And I know that might sound harsh, but the thing is we all have the assumptions and we all have the confirmation bias going on. So it really inoculates us when we start asking ourselves how we're wrong instead of pointing out how they might be wrong. And when we can do that, we can start to open our own mind to see that, honestly, we thought they were miles away, but they're saying the same thing in a different way. And so asking ourselves how we're wrong in our context, how we're wrong in not sharing the right information, how we're wrong in the assumptions, we start to actually settle down a little bit, and we're able to hear the other person a little bit more and start asking more questions. Kevin was 100% right. The more questions we ask, the better they paint the picture, the easier it is for us to be able to see where they're at compared to where we're at. And then we can guide the conversation to where we can have a co-creation of meaning. And that's where magic starts to really happen in communication. So anyway, that was kind of heady stuff. Pretty fun. And we will talk to you next week. Adios, everyone.
So long.